Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for watching. If you have followed conservative politics for any length of time, you have probably heard of ALEC, an acronym for the American Legislative Exchange Council. Every year, ALEC creates model legislation believed to be conservative that's put forth in state legislatures on a variety of topics across the country. Many Republicans believe it to be a reliable organization for good legislation to support. But is it as reliable as believed, and who are the primary funders of ALEC? Is that information readily available like it is with other organizations? Are there other organizations thought to be conservative that might not really be or are not as conservative on all issues? Tiffany Boyd of Free Your Children is with us tonight to discuss this and more. But first, it's time for the Informer Report. According to an article in the New American, Marjorie Taylor Greene has accused President Trump of abandoning America first. She cited his focus on foreign affairs and interventionist policies. She referenced his recent hosting of jihadist-turned-Syrian President Ahmed Sharia, bailing out Argentina, and funding of foreign countries and wars. She also disagrees that inflation has lowered overall. Trump's response was to say Greene has lost her way, and in regards to foreign policy, I have to view the presidency as a worldwide situation, not locally. While no doubt foreign policy is the domain of the executive branch, saying he views the presidency as a worldwide situation should concern us all. He wasn't elected to be president of the world. We elected him to represent us. And so yes, he's the key guy for diplomacy, but I think all of us would agree with Marjorie to at least some degree that there's been way too much focus on other countries and other parts of the world. And even though we can't be totally isolationist, we need more of America first. Similar and more detailed concerns about Trump's dedication to MAGA can be found in an article in the American Thinker last week by Olivia Murray, titled MAGA Dies by 1,000 Cuts. The article covers her disgust over the 50-year mortgage proposal and allowing 600,000 Chinese students in American universities. I think that makes us all mad right there. That's just crazy. In part to keep the universities afloat, which makes it even worse. Work visas for Indians and other foreigners, that's another sore spot. A Trump DOJ with Bondi still pushing the Biden administration position against gun rights. That's not what we voted for. And that's not what he said we were going to get. Now, I do want to say one thing. He has done a lot of good things, at least he's made some good executive orders, but the Congress hasn't codified anything. These guys are AWOL in Congress on codifying many of the good things that he has attempted to do. Now, one positive step for MAGA was announced by Brooke Rollins, the Agricultural Secretary, on Thursday regarding SNAP. Rollins said that they found so much fraud just in the 29 red states alone that they're going to require all recipients to reapply for benefits to verify eligibility. I'm sure it's even worse in the blue state. Let's hope they follow through on this. This really needs to be done. I mean, SNAP was feeding the poor was never the job of the federal government. Never. And we need to stop it. If states want this, they can do it themselves. If their Constitution allows it, then by all means, let the states do it, but not the federal government. Also remember SNAP, and you may not be aware of this, but SNAP stands for Socialism Never Advances Prosperity. Marsha Blackburn now says she won't sue the DOJ under provision added to the Senate budget bill last week that would have allowed her and 7 other senators to receive up to $500K per violations by the FBI under Biden for monitoring their phone activity during the Arctic frost probe related to the J6 investigation. She now claims she always intended to sue just for a declaratory judgment. Nobody believes you, Marsha. Nobody believes you, even your own people. But when the story first broke, that is not what she said. And in any event, she voted to fleece the taxpayers. If she just wanted to declaratory, why was there money in the bill? Her and Haggerty and others voted for this. It's a disgrace. And what about the the people that really suffered during J6? What are we doing for those people? Those people deserve compensation. Speaking of Marcia, let's talk about straw polls and what you need to know. Let's talk about BS, aka the Blackburn scheme, to make her election seem inevitable. Now, here's the way this works. They'll do a straw poll. They're going to, let's say, a Reagan Day event, and they're going to have a straw poll. Well, now, it may be in whatever county. That doesn't mean that the people at that event are all from that county. And that doesn't mean that the people with the Marcia Blackburn campaign, the BS campaign, or even the Rose campaign, that doesn't mean that some of those people are not on the payroll. That doesn't mean that some of those people haven't come from other counties. She's got, especially Marcia's campaign, she's got a lot of young people that just seem to show up at all these GOP events. So don't put too much stock in these straw polls. When you see her winning or Rose winning, especially some by the margin sometimes, because they're bringing people from other counties. I suspect at least that some of them are on the payroll, at least on the payroll for that night. And it's not an accurate picture of how much support that they may have in any given county. So when you hear about a straw poll result, just keep that in the back of your mind. Not everybody there was from that county. Now, I personally think the counties should only allow citizens of their county to take part in the straw poll. But of course, these things are all fundraisers, and they don't want to alienate anybody. So they'd much rather just go along, play the game, and if there's a distorted picture out there of support, well, okay, that's just the way it is. But keep that in mind. Also, I would encourage you all to watch the old Bryan County GOP recording. It's on our site, Tennessee Informer website, from last week. Compare and contrast what Monty had to say, what Monty Fritz had to say, and yes, I'll tell you I'm supporting him, what Monty Fritz had to say versus Marcia's mouthpiece for that event, which was Glenn Jacobs and John Rose. Just listen to all three. At about the 37-minute mark of the event is when Glenn Jacobs starts speaking for Marcia. And around the 44-minute mark, John Rose does his speech. And then at the 106:20 mark, thereabouts, Monty Fritz speaks. Listen to them and compare them for yourself. I think you'll be surprised. Early in the year, Governor Lee signed legislation that stated that the state and its political subdivisions must not be compelled to enforce or collaborate with enforcement of requirements of mandates issued by the WHO, the UN, or the World Economic Forum. But last week, he met with the WF in a forum hosted by Vanderbilt, touting the business-friendly atmosphere of Tennessee. Have no doubt that Lee and the establishment in Tennessee are globalist and cannot be trusted. This includes the Haslams and Frist, among others. These guys are big government guys. That's not going to change. Most of our GOP establishment is fine with the garbage coming down from places like the WEF. So we need to elect people in the future that will disavow and stick to their promise not to support those types of institutions. The disgraceful treatment of a U.S. Army veteran and black Confederate on Veterans Day in Hillsborough County, Florida. H.K. Egerton, a U.S. Army veteran, Vietnam veteran by the way, known as the Black Confederate, he wears a Confederate uniform and carries a Confederate battle flag. He educates the public on the truth of the war for Southern independence. He was forced to leave a Veterans Day event in Hillsborough County, Florida. Now, over the years, he has attended numerous Veterans Days events in his uniform and with the flag with no problems. When they asked Army veterans to stand, he stood, as many others did, and started singing the Army song. Out of the blue, several, and I've heard different numbers. I've heard up to 15, I've heard 5, 6, but several security guards approached him and told him he had to leave. When he asked why, he was told because of his uniform and flag. Prior to the ceremony, he had been greeted by other veterans, and even after it was over, There's people that came by and thanked him for being there and apologized for the treatment that he got. This is a disgraceful way to treat a veteran. Congress in the 1950s recognized Confederate veterans as U.S. veterans. And as I said, he was also a Vietnam veteran. If you think Hillsborough County's actions were wrong, you can contact the county chairman, Ken Hagan, at 813-272-5452, or Vice Chairman Christine Miller at 813-272-5740. Now, of course, they're trying to put a little different story out there, but there's too many eyewitnesses for this. So this should never happen to a U.S. veteran. One more thing, this is not on the list, but it's very important. The 7th District Congressional race. Now, guys, you know we have a very narrow margin in the House. Mark Green didn't make that situation any better when he resigned, by the way. And so now, Van Epps is the GOP primary candidate, and Afton Bain, a far-left loon, you may as well call her a communist, because pretty much everybody in the Democrat Party today that's an elected official is a communist, or they certainly support things that communists agree with. So those are your choices. It's either going to be Van Epps or it's going to be the blonde commie. We don't want the blonde commie, okay? We don't want her representing our district, and we don't want her in Congress. The primaries were pretty close in turnout between the Democrats and the Republicans, so it's really important to get out there. The Dems smell blood in the water on this, so you need to get out there. And look, I got no enthusiasm for voting for Van Epps. I may have to take a little bag in there with me whenever I go push the button, and I understand you may feel that way, but he's still a better option than Afton Bain. The election is December 2nd. Early voting is already going on, so get out there and vote. And that wraps up this installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at tennesseeinformer.tv@gmail.com. Before we say hello to our guest tonight, Tiffany Boyd, here's a brief word from our sponsor, our very first sponsor. Now, other people have given us some great support, but this is our first official sponsor. LifeWave. Live long, live well, live young. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsor.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
And now to our guest, Tiffany Boyd. Thank you for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me again.
We're glad to have you. And before I forget, you'll be back on January 5th to talk about your bill before the upcoming session. So we look forward to that as well. Before we get to the main topic, let's remind the viewers about your organization, Free Your Children, and what it does.
Absolutely. Free Your Children is a ministry where we believe that we are standing as the watchman on the wall. We seek to equip families and individual citizens with the information they need to better protect their constitutional rights, their educational rights, their parental rights. We also have a mission to just educate as many people as possible about what is happening in education, where these agendas came from, where we are today, and where we are headed in the future. And we are excited about the many opportunities that God has blessed us with, and our goal is just to inform as many people as we can. So we're just trying to get the word out there as quickly as possible because we know it's time sensitive. We are based out of Tennessee, but we are actually traveling all over the United States wherever we're asked to come, because as you know, this is a nationwide agenda.
Absolutely, and there's some great information on that site. As I said in the opening, ALEC is well known in conservative circles and has a good reputation among many. I've heard of it for years, but I've also heard others have less than flattering things to say about it. Let's start off with the GB&U, the good, bad, and ugly. In your opinion, is there anything good about ALEC?
Well, that's a loaded question there, because I know amongst the conservative circles, they've touted themselves as helping to accomplish some things to reinforce conservative beliefs and values. But as we have started doing this work with Free Your Children, and the more that we have delved into these topics, we have come to know and understand that what this is looking like and the work that ALEC is involved in, especially in our wheelhouse, within the educational wheelhouse and the parental rights wheelhouse, is the fact that these are corporate lobbyists. So when we talk about what ALEC really is doing, what it is happening with ALEC is that corporate lobbyists are actually passing, drafting and getting laws passed. So if you believe that lobbyists should be deciding what our laws are, then I guess you may be a fan of ALEC. But as for me personally and our ministry, we see the dangers in that. We see the dangers in corporate lobbyists creating legislation that oftentimes the citizens may not even know about until after the bill has already been drafted and passed. Because unless you're keeping a very close watch on legislation, not only in Tennessee but across the nation, because this is a huge organization that spans all 50 states, and they are working with legislators all across the United States to get legislation passed, and oftentimes it does benefit big corporations. And most of the time we are finding out that the citizens really do not have a voice, and it is concerning because they do not have to divulge who funds them. We have been able to find out through research that we have done, and many other people have done this research as well too, and I am pulling information from multiple different research entities and things that they have published in public records to form our own opinions. And I just encourage anyone, anytime you're considering supporting any organization, you have to do, or you should do, your research to find out what is really behind these organizations. And I think that's so important in order to be an informed citizen. So I encourage everyone to do that, not to listen to this interview and say Tiffany Boyd said, but go out and do your own research.
Well, now I think we've got a couple slides in reference to ALEC's position on the corporations having a voice, and the funders as well.
Yeah, some of the big funders, the biggest funders, ALEC is more than 50 years old. And as I said, it brings together corporate lobbyists and state legislators where they come together and they meet behind closed doors to draft model legislation. And what happens with this model legislation is those lawmakers leave those private meetings with a text format that they can then take back to their own individual states and customize and create their own legislation that they can then, file their bills in their own state houses. And so, again, these are closed door meetings. And so when we were looking to see who some of their largest funders are, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, but the Bradley Foundation is one that we're going to talk about here as we move through the interview, but also the pharmaceutical research and manufacturers. Big Pharma is another huge entity that supports ALEC, and that's things like Pfizer, Bayer, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Then you have big fossil fuels, energy companies, tobacco companies, alcohol companies like Anheuser-Busch. Of course, you'll see the Coke network pop up again and again and again because those guys are just absolutely everywhere. You have the transportation group, you have which UPS and FedEx, telecom, so an entity, business charter is one of those. So there are others too, and you can find this, and I'll post some links too where people can go and look at exactly what it says, but some of this is on the slides that you popped up there as well. But this is a huge moneymaker, for ALEC. I mean, this isn't a very these aren't tiny, these aren't peanuts, okay? This
Right.
is millions and millions of dollars that we're talking about, and of course, there are membership fees attached to becoming a member of ALEC as well. And I found that just really interesting because for a private sector member, for instance, if I wanted to join ALEC, or Dave, if you wanted to join ALEC, you're looking at a minimum of $12,000, and even more if you're wanting additional access. If you want to be on their task force where you go behind the closed door, then you're going to drop another 5,000 for those closed door meetings. So anywhere.
So our legislators don't have to pay these fees then?
Oh yeah, they have to pay, not as much, but we're going to get to that in a minute. These are for private members.
Okay.
So a private member, like a corporation, that would be a private member, they're going to drop anywhere from $12,000 to $25,000 a year to be a member of ALEC and to participate in those closed door meetings, depending on, again, how much access you want, to what they're doing. Lawmakers can spend $100 for a 2-year membership to become a member of ALEC. And then depending on state rules, they can solicit donations to cover the cost of attending meetings, and they can also apply for travel reimbursements. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Travel reimbursement.
For travel reimbursements, yes, because they host, swanky trips, I guess you could say, or little getaways where lawmakers can come, have all the expenses paid if that's allowed per their state rules, and then they leave those meetings ready to file bills and pass bills, based on what they decided in those closed door meetings. And for me personally, I don't want to see our state government in Tennessee run like that. I do not believe that lobbyists should have that much power and persuasion within our own state, because the citizens, the will of the citizens oftentimes gets cut out, like we saw happen during the Education Freedom Scholarship Act lobbying, the last couple of years when it was finally passed during the special session, this last legislative session. And if you have spent any time at all, any length of time at all at the Capitol, not only in Tennessee, but, I hear this reiterated from, our many other contacts across the nation, is that the lobbyists take up all the time of your elected representatives and, senators at the Capitol, when the average citizen should be able to get in, with their representative or with their senator to talk about issues that, they are invested in. But oftentimes these lobbyists monopolize the time there, and you can't get a block of time to even get in and have a conversation.
Yeah, well, the average citizen can't be up there all the time, but the lobbyists are paid to be there every day.
Yes.
I mean, that's their job,
Yes.
is to be there every day. And
Yep.
for those of us who go up there occasionally to talk to a legislator about a bill, or to be in listen to a committee hearing or whatever, I mean, we can't do that all the time. We may be able to do it a few days out of the session. Most of us can only do it a few days out of the session. Some people have, are able to do more, but they're outnumbered. And we're outnumbered when it comes to law. I mean, they've already got the Chamber of Commerce. So this is kind of like I guess this is another wing of the Chamber of Commerce, or the Chamber of Commerce on steroids. Something along those lines.
I think it's an organization that because look at the bang for the buck that they're getting. They can host these meetings and have all these lawmakers and these private corporations and corporate lobbyists come in and, get it all done for just a little amount of money. And then again, they leave there ready to pass these bills. And interestingly enough, over a few months ago, I don't want to give too much away here because I don't want to name this person. So I'm going to talk about this and provide them with anonymity, but I gave a speech, I guess you could say, or participated in a talk in an area of Tennessee. And after I presented, I had someone approach me, and they wasted no time to tell me that they were actually affiliated with ALEC, and they were discussing the bill that we had run last legislative session, the FREE Act, and they asked me if I had worked with ALEC in terms of this particular piece of legislation. And of course, I'd already done a lot of research on ALEC, so I told this individual know I had not. And they went on to tell me that they were affiliated with ALEC, and that if we wanted to get legislation passed, we should consider working with them because they could get legislation passed, but we had to be willing to compromise. And of course, I've heard that over in terms of our bill that we ran, and I promptly looked at the individual and said, here's the thing. We don't believe in compromising freedom. You either believe in freedom or you don't. There's no compromise when it comes to that. So I think what happens is just exactly what she said. I think some bills, they go into their little private closed door sessions, and it's important, all these organizations want a good track record of getting the legislation that they're bringing to the table passed. And oftentimes, just so long as they can say that the bill passed, then that looks good on their resume.
Right.
But for those that care about the details of the bill and what it really means, sometimes compromising, if it totally destroys what you're trying to accomplish, then that's something that you wouldn't want passed to begin with. So I found that very fascinating.
But let me ask you, what compromise did they want you to make?
Well, in terms of the education freedom, the FREE Act that we were running last legislative session, that particular bill would have absolved families that were registering under that particular category of homeschooling. It would have absolved them from the compulsory attendance law. And I know that was a sticking point in and of itself right there, because there's a huge push for compulsory attendance across the nation. But there are states where the freedoms that we were asking to have recognized in Tennessee are already recognized, and we were simply wanting, our constitutional rights in Tennessee recognized as the other, it was 11 states at the time, had already done. But of course, our Republicans killed that bill. And that brings me to a next point. The irony in the show was just glaring. I know you and I were talking about this before we went live, but I found it very interesting that some of the same Republican representatives who were opposed to our FREE Act, which would have given families true educational autonomy in the state of Tennessee, were actually named as ALEC policy champions because they voted in favor of the Education Freedom Scholarship Act. And they specifically named Bill Lee, Randy McNally, Jack Johnson, Cameron Sexton, and William Lamberth as ALEC policy champions.
No surprise. So, no surprise at all.
Exactly. So I think if you're keeping up with those names and what they have been involved in for multiple legislative sessions, then that speaks volumes. Some other members, and this is not an exhaustive list, and I encourage, again, your listeners to go and do their own research, because they have the members of ALEC and representatives and senators that are affiliated with ALEC categorized by state. So some other names that you may find interesting were our state chair of ALEC, which is Chris Todd. Yep. And then some other members are Mark White, Farrell Hale, and Jeremy Faison. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. So if you go in and look that up, you'll see our other representatives and senators who were listed on that. But I think that's what concerns me the most, again, is the fact that they seem to be cutting out the individuals like you and I, the average citizens, who these laws are going to affect the most. And instead, it appears to me, this is my opinion, that they are making sure that they are taking the best interest of these corporations and placing those interests at the forefront when they're making these decisions. And I think that the general public needs to be aware of that. And they're effective. I mean, it's an effective group. You're talking, again, about millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I was reading something from USA Today when I was doing research for this interview, and it stated that from 2010 to 2018, across all 50 states where ALEC had they had drafted and filed these model bills, because that's what they call them. Right. There were 2,900 of those bills, and 600 became law. So
wow.
21% of these model bills became law. So I don't know about you, but that's a pretty high percentage, in my opinion. And again, I know that our representatives and our senators during a legislative session, there are thousands of bills that are filed, and some of these bills have multiple, hundreds of pages.
Right.
But I think for the general public, and like you said it just a second ago, your average citizen cannot go
Yep.
to the legislature every single day. And we were there multiple times a week for weeks last legislative session. And we met a lot of these lobbyists and had conversations with them. And you're right, they are there every day. They're paid to do that. That is their job. So they are there all day, meeting regularly, with the either the senator or the rep, as many as possible, I'm certain, as many times as possible, I'm certain. And of course, we had our children with us many times that we were at the Capitol, and our kids were asking questions, of the lobbyist. And of course, several of them that we spoke to, they were very careful about what they would tell you. But when you would ask, the kids would say, well, who do you work for? And they would say, well, we work for different people depending on, what they need us to be here for.
Depending on who's asking.
Yeah, yeah. So whichever bill they're there to get passed, whichever corporation has hired them, that's what they're there, to do. And you're right, it's expensive to go to the Capitol. It's very time consuming. Most people have to work jobs that would prevent them from being able to come to the Capitol on a regular basis. And it was expensive for us to go, to the Capitol. You're looking at, trying to find a place to park, which isn't easy and is very expensive in Nashville. And then, of course, we would, go in with food that we would take with us, so that we wouldn't have to, purchase food while we were there, because sometimes they will drag legislation out for hours and hours and hours. Yes.
And you'll wait for a bill in committee, and then your bill gets rescheduled. So you were there all day waiting to hear your bill, and now it's rescheduled, and maybe you can't come back,
Yep. Yeah, we've done that now for 2 legislative sessions, and we would be there 5-6 hours, at a time. We were there when, the Democrats would be there, and they would be fighting a certain piece of legislation, and they would actually clear the chambers, and we'd have to go back out into the hallway, and it would be a circus out there, and then we would have to wait until they could get that under control before we could go back. I mean, it is very, time consuming, and so I understand that many people cannot be there on a regular basis, but you can watch it at home.
Right.
They do stream these, so I would encourage people, if you can and have a chance, and they're supposed to be recorded so you can go back and watch them. I really encourage you to keep a pulse on what is happening at your state legislatures, no matter if you live in Tennessee or wherever you live. If you can't be there, find someone that that can help support them so that they can be there to keep a pulse on the environment and what's actually going on, and try to track pieces of legislation that you think, may be something that it plans or intends to encroach upon your rights. And of course, for us, we watch closely, education, parental rights, anything in terms of that nature, because I think that, and one thing I want to clarify on this show is that there's been a lot of confusion with Free Your Children and what we're really doing, because some people think we are one issue, which is just school choice. But I want to tell everyone that it's not. Our primary goal is arming parents with information they need to better protect their families. And so that encompasses a lot of different topics. And school choice is not just one bill. It's not just a voucher bill. School choice, actually, the globalization of education is the goal. It is a globalist initiative that encompasses every area of our lives. So it's going to touch 2A rights. It's going to touch property rights.
Yep.
It's going to touch social credit scores. It's going to the digital currency. All of those things that are going to usher in the 4th industrial revolution are tied to school choice. And so they have to be able to advance universal school choice to usher that in. And so the things
talk a little bit about, the 4th industrial revolution. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I've heard of it. I know a little bit, but the audience probably wants to hear a little more about that.
It's all of the topics that it's basically a technocratic society that you're going to see ushering in. I've done some fantastic interviews with a man named John Kleizek, where he goes into great detail about this. He's actually written a couple of articles on that. I'll get you the links to those, Dave, so that you can share those. He'd be a great interview sometimes if
Okay, sure.
you'd like to have him on.
Sure.
Also, he's written a book called School World Order, where he talks about this as well. This is what we're going to see. All those topics that I just spoke about, this globalization is marching toward all of those things, where essentially, we are going to become what we don't want to become, which is you will own nothing and be happy.
Right,
And
right.
Big Brother will control every aspect of, your lives. And of course, it will be the industrial age. Everything is automated now with the advancement of AI and our surveillance state, and, being able to data mine, vast amounts of data to really keep us under control using technology. Those are the things that you're going to see in the fourth industrial revolution.
What connections does ALEC have with the people that are pushing this agenda?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you brought that up, because ALEC, they support the globalization of education, or in other words, the privatization of education, which is what is going to happen in order for, this agenda to be advanced. So what we have found is one of the largest funders of ALEC is the Bradley Foundation, and they are a huge proponent of the school choice initiative. And I have some notes right here on this. The Bradley Foundation paid Alliance Defending Freedom, who actually promotes school choice, $824,000 in 2022.
For what?
They also paid ALEC $500,000 in 2022. They also paid the State Policy Network $235,000 in 2022, and I have written extensively about all of these organizations, but they also paid $7.5 million to 34 state affiliates and national umbrella organizations of the State Policy Network. And they also paid the Heritage Foundation $529,800.
So, so Heritage and Alliance Defending Freedom support the globalization of private education.
Correct. I'm going to give you some names here. I also wrote an article for the Borough Pulse that's listed on my website. It's also over on the Borough Pulse, called The Players Behind the Globalization of Education, where I break down the involvement of several of these organizations, but Americans for Prosperity is one.
Yeah, AFP is not a surprise. AFP would be no surprise whatsoever.
Correct. If you live in Tennessee, they've been behind the push the last two legislative sessions, with the last one being when they, successfully ushered this in. They have also made an announcement that they plan to advance school choice this upcoming legislative session in 2026, so we will be watching that closely. We expected that, so that's no surprise, and we also expect homeschoolers to be the target, because UNESCO has now made it very clear that homeschooling is the target. That's my most recent article over on my website. They partnered with Johns Hopkins University and created something called the Homeschooling Hub, where they made it very clear that their target was the homeschooling community. And so you're going to start seeing a major push, even more.
So let me ask you, has anybody gotten Alliance Defending Freedom or Heritage, because those are considered conservative organizations, has anybody got them on record? Has anybody asked them about this?
Yes.
Do they understand what they're doing? Why are they doing it? And what's their response?
Well, we had an opportunity, not this past legislative session, but the legislative session before, to speak to some of the Alliance Defending Freedom individuals that were there when homeschooling was named. And it was an avoidance of the topic when they found out that we were opposed to school choice, with them telling one of our volunteers that were there that they stayed out of that they didn't participate in any school choice lobbying, and nothing could be further from the truth.
But they got paid, right? We know they got paid.
Yes, it's very clear that, and they have it on their website, that they support this advancement of the privatization of education. So you've got American Federation for Children, which is, Betsy DeVos, and then you've got Moms for Liberty. They are a huge,
Moms for Liberty.
Proponent, absolutely. They've actually just recently partnered with Corey DeAngelis, and he's going to be
What?
speaking at their national
Moms for
at their
Liberty with
national.
that guy?
Yes. Yes, at their national summit. He's going to be one of the keynote speakers. And again, all of that information and the screenshots from their announcements are over in that article that I have written.
So I hope they're not bringing their kids to that thing.
Exactly, exactly. It just befuddles me to even try to wrap my mind around why any conservative organization would think, after his Corey DeAngelis' history, that would be a good idea. And
Remind everybody what that history is.
Yeah, the history was he was called. It was found and discovered that he had a history of participating in the gay porn industry under the stage name, I guess you could say, Seth Rose. And so all of that was leaked. He didn't admit this up front. What happened was someone found it. It was leaked to the media, and then he came out later after he went radio silent, for several days. Then he came out and blamed it on past affiliation. So he wasn't upfront with that from the very beginning. He waited until it was discovered, right, and then he addressed it. And then those of us, which my biggest concern with him even prior to that, even though that's just unbelievable, was the fact that he was actually listed as a UNESCO policy advisor on UNESCO's website. And so when we found that out about him, when we started asking him questions, he started blocking us and deleting comments. And so we kept, hammering him on that. And then right after that, all this information about him participating in the gay porn industry came out.
UNESCO is the UN, and I just can't recall. Just tell me what it stands for again.
It's the United Nations Educational Scientific Organization. It's UNESCO's. I'd have to look up the acronym. It's in my notes. I'll look at just a second.
But I mean, the bottom line is it's from the UN.
Yes.
That's your first red flag.
Yes, yes. And of course, they love using it's the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It's a mouthful. So it's one of the acronyms, but yes, it's UNESCO, and they are attached to the WEF, the World Economic Forum. So those two work together. And of course, I have all of this information in my most recent article over on the Borough Pulse, and it's also on my website too. It's UNESCO Takeover of Home Education. So that's the article that I referenced.
That's a red flag that Ray Charles could see, but somehow our legislators can't see it.
Absolutely. And, in education and in anything really, they love these acronyms. That's why I had to go back, because I wanted to make sure that I gave you the correct name for the acronym for UNESCO. It's lengthy. And it is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. But you'll hear it referred to over and over again just as UNESCO because it's such a mouthful. Yeah. So, and when we're talking about these organizations, you'll hear people use acronyms. And I had someone say to me, because they knew I was coming on your show tonight, Dave, can you please explain what the acronyms are? Because if you're in this world, you use the acronyms often. But for those of us who don't know what AFP and AFC and FOF and SPN is, it gets confusing.
Right.
So when we talk about organizations that are participating in the globalization of education, UNESCO is one of them, and I just rattled off their full name.
Right.
Then, as you said, Americans for Prosperity,
also known as Amnesty for Pedro, because they push that. And that's that's Koch brothers. There's another key.
Yes, yes, it is Koch brothers. And then there's American Federation for Children. Then there's Moms for Liberty. Then there's the Herzog Foundation. Focus on the Family is another one. The Heritage Foundation is another one. SPN, or the State Policy Network, they have deep roots in Tennessee and across the nation, and they're highlighted in my most recent article as well. Then you've got the Bradley Foundation that we just talked about, that's funding a lot of these other organizations, and Alliance Defending Freedom as well. And that's not an exhaustive list. I mean, there's the Beacon Institute. Then they have organizations that branch off from those. So this is a huge network.
So is there any well-known conservative organization that is opposing this?
Not that I can recall offhand. And I would just caution anyone with this. do your research. And you're going to hear me say that over and over again. There are a lot of organizations that claim that they are opposed to the globalization, and they are opposed to UNESCO, and they're opposed to the agendas that are going to basically strip away our personal freedoms. But then when you start looking at some things that they're doing, that is in direct conflict to what they are saying. So you really have to take the time to do the deep research to really figure out if what they're saying is actually, accurate and goes with, what they're doing and who's funding them and who they're supporting.
That's a big thing. Who's funding them?
Yep.
What they do, contrasted with what they say, which
Right.
that's like all politicians. Of course, our state, not just our state, but all the politicians, and there's usually money tied from, because,
Yes.
I'm sure there's a national, what's the national link on this? Because I'm sure there's a federal government link on this somewhere, some way. Are you aware of any of that?
Well, if you look at the outline and the blueprint of ALEC and who all of their members are, and they have congressional members, they have senators, they have representatives, and it goes all the way up. So, the more individuals that they have at the higher level that have bought into, what it is they're trying to accomplish, the more power that they're going to have. So check that out and look and see, on a congressional level, who all is involved with this particular organization. And I'm not just picking on ALEC. I'm an equal opportunity
Abuser? Equal
abuser.
opportunity
There
abuser?
you go.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Because again, for us, we're not a political organization. I'm not a politician. I'm not going to be running for office. We don't endorse politicians. All we do is do the research that we feel like families and citizens need to know about in order to protect their freedoms. And then we have those discussions, and we encourage others to do the same and to ask hard questions. I don't really know when it became taboo to ask questions, to be able to learn. I guess it became taboo when those that are being expected to answer those questions don't want to answer them because it may be something that would be a detriment to a position that they're hoping to achieve or a bill that they're hoping to get passed.
It's kind of a political Fifth Amendment, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. So, I would say if you have been supporting organizations in the past and you do not know if they are supporting some of these globalist agendas, again, a quick check of who's funding them and where they stand on certain positions. If they are pro school choice, then they are pro advancing globalization, because that's what it leads to. And they may not know that. So I'm going to give them grace and say, and if they don't understand what the issues are in terms of being for universal school choice or being for advancing, we already have school choice.
Right.
And I think that that's what everyone needs to understand. We've always had school choice. You have the choice to send your child to public education, you have the choice to privately educate your child, or you have the choice to home educate your child. That is school choice.
Yeah.
What they're pushing is government school choice, where the government is funding private education and therein will control private education.
Right.
So if you have a neighbor, a friend, your local GOP, if you have a conservative, we know the Democrats are supposedly against school choice, even though if you look back throughout history with the school choice agenda, Democrats have supported agendas to advance school choice as well. But it has become
Well, and they're big supporters. They're big supporters of the UN in general. The whole global thing. Yeah.
Right. So, even though we are opposed to school choice and they're opposed to school choice, we're opposed for different reasons. They're opposed because they do not want it to destroy the traditional path of education. We're opposed to it because we know it seeks to globalize education, and we do not want more government control. And so I think that if you have, groups, friends, family, legislators that do not understand what this is all about, encourage them to get educated on the topics, because they don't want to be on the wrong side of this once history plays out. And we've seen what it's looking like in other states. We've seen what's happened in other countries, just like Sweden, when they started to implement school choice through incrementalism, and then it just became illegal to homeschool in Sweden. And so we are seeing that trajectory begin to unfold in the United States, because it is incrementalism, and we will only see the encroachment upon our rights grow as time passes. And that's what we're already seeing in other states where they have advanced these agendas.
And like I said, if it involves UNESCO, that should tell anybody and everybody right there, look, this is not something we want to be involved with. But ALEC, like I say, I've heard about him for years, and for years I always, people that I thought were conservative were telling me about them and what a great organization they were. Never did any real digging. And then several years in the last recent years, I've heard things, and from people who I trust, not people that but I have never really done the digging, and I probably need to do some more digging on that. But that's the thing too. So many people buy in, whether it's ALEC or Heritage. I mean, does Heritage do some good things? Yes, but I know some things Heritage has pushed in the past. I think, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it Heritage that pushed originally, like the forerunner of Obamacare? Wasn't that a Heritage project?
Yeah. And I think what people need to realize is, this is kind of what I equate it to, Dave. Let's say that you had been captured by the enemy and you were being held captive. And they showed you some kindness and gave you, some extra food or a book to read, or, does that really make them good? Even though you're still being held captive. And so I look at that from the perspective of some of these organizations. I know that sounds like a really strange comparison there, but I look at these organizations, and yes, they may have passed some pieces of legislation, a handful that have been good, but if they are supporting UNESCO's initiative to globalize education, is that really good? In the end.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that they're not supporting other things that we would agree are good, but they shouldn't get a pass.
Right.
Just because, they do other things that are good. They shouldn't get a pass.
Yes. Exactly. And that's the thing. We have to stop, so many people get so caught up in, we talk about people worshiping, actors and actresses and famous people, but I think people also kind of get stuck into, they get really attached to organizations that have large names. They get attached to political figures, and they do not want to hold them accountable for things that are less than stellar, or things that they need to be held accountable for, because they don't want it to look as if they are abandoning their support for that organization or that person. But I would encourage you it's your civic duty, and we're actually called to do those things, which is to hold people accountable, especially if they're representing us or they're wanting to represent us. We need to make sure we ask the tough questions and we hold them accountable and have conversations. It doesn't mean that you have to be, rude or, disrespectful. They may find it rude or disrespectful if you're asking them a question that they don't want to answer.
An uncomfortable question is not rude.
Exactly. And I always say that a non-answer is an answer. So if they refuse to answer your question, then you have your answer. And if they don't want to talk about these topics, and if they are avoiding you, like we find to be par for the course when we go to the legislature, then you already have your answer. And again, they shouldn't get a free pass for that. We should be having discussions. Hey, we went to discuss, school choice and the globalization of education with X, Y, and Z, and they refused to meet with us. And we should be able to have those conversations, and those legislators should be answering to the very people who pay their salary and put them in office and gave them that power to begin with.
At the county level, from what I understand, they have the sunshine laws. So you're not supposed to talk about things that you're going to vote on. You're not supposed to talk with other members privately, or somebody that might be in, let's say there's a bid out for a contract for something for the county, then you're not supposed to have private conversations. It's the sunshine law. And I don't think it applies to the state legislature, but for them to be able, I would think, and maybe it is, I don't know, anything that conversations they have with ALEC, any conversations they have with any lobbyist,
Yes.
I think that, and maybe it is, that should be a matter of public record.
I agree. If they're not going to make lobbying illegal, then we should know exactly what they're talking about behind those closed doors.
Right. And that would go even to their schedule. So, we have a hard time getting on their schedule. And like I said, the lobbyists are up there all the time. You should be able to know, okay, well, if, your representative, their schedule should be available to you to at least see why they don't have time to visit with you, if that's the case.
Exactly.
And see how many times ALEC is there, or how many times the Farm Bureau is there, or this organization or that organization. But yet,
Absolutely. It would be interesting to see how much time these lobbyists are actually monopolizing.
right, yeah. And the number of bills, you mentioned that ALEC ran how many bills last year?
Well, from 2010 to 2018, they ran 2,900 bills, and 600 of those became law.
It's actually a pretty good percentage, even though that's over a stretch of time. That's a pretty, and like as you mentioned, these are that's modeled. That's why you'll see a lot of basically the same bill being run across multiple states at a time. They coordinate it that way, and of course, once something passes in another state, because a lot of times states are hesitant to be the first. Well, has this been done anywhere else?
Right.
Well, yeah, hey, Georgia did it, or South Carolina did it, whatever. Well, then legislators are a little more agreeable to get on board with it.
Well, absolutely. That's what they refer to as their model bills, and they basically give them the same text. So they're essentially writing the bills in these closed-door sessions that they can just literally copy and paste across the states for whichever legislators that are willing to, get those bills filed and run them in their, respective state houses. And we see this. I mean, there was tons, in my opinion, there was tons of model, school choice legislation that was going on all across the United States, and the states were just falling. You could see it was almost verbatim. And AFP was in the forefront in many of these states, and they were busing people in just like they did in Tennessee to sit in the committee meetings.
Just like the Democrats do, they bus in people.
Yeah. And they were also sending the same people to multiple different states. So AFP, the guy that they brought in to testify in Tennessee, was also in other states testifying as well for school choice.
Right. And now, every year, and you may have a better number on this, but I've heard something somewhere between, I guess, 1,500 and 2,000 bills are brought forth in our state legislature. That's a lot of legislation.
It is a lot.
And most of that legislation, that's not generated from people like me and you. That's generated by organizations, lobbyists of some sort, some industry representatives of some sort. And that doesn't leave a whole lot of, I really think the legislature takes on too much every year.
I agree.
Number one, you cannot know, and in the House, I think they maybe were going down to, I know several years ago, the House went down to 15 bills that they could sponsor per year. I'm hearing, I think it's maybe 12 this year, or it's going to 10.
Yeah, I heard they reduced it as well.
And that's not a bad idea, because that's a lot.
It is a lot, and some of them have hundreds of pages.
Yeah. And well, I don't know that we have I don't know how many in the state have hundreds of pages. I'm sure there's at least some. Certainly at the federal level, they have that. But way too much stuff. And there's no way a legislator can actually know everything that's in these bills. I think they need to limit it even more.
Absolutely. I will tell you that there was one bill in particular in that our Tennessee state legislature, and it was a caption bill. And embedded in that caption bill was the at-risk boarding charters that passed. And I believe it was a 235-page bill. So they're really good. When they want things passed, they will stuff things in, and the caption may say something like reporting allergies. That sounds, really platonic, but embedded within that bill is their real objective, which is to pass, institutions to house children where they're going to be forced to live.
Well, let's explain that caption bill a little more for the audience. And this is my understanding, and you may have dealt with more of them than I have. The caption, when it's filed, It's just basically going to state, it's going to give like a very generic summary, and it's going to talk about the codes that are going to be impacted. Tennessee codes annotated that will be impacted.
Right.
But then they usually hold that bill.
Yep, it's a placeholder.
It's a placeholder, and then they will, towards the end of session, that's when they flesh it out. And they do that. Now, sometimes it turns out to be a good thing. Most of the time it doesn't. I don't really
Correct.
like the way they do that. I think you just be upfront with it. Part of the reason they do that is, and I know people have done it, is sometimes to avoid, having in this case, this had to do with a bill that was a conservative bill, and the guy was just really tired of dealing with all the crazy fruitcakes on the left. And so he just did the caption bill. He used the caption bill, and then at the later on in the session, he was able to flesh it out and get it through. So that's one of the reasons, but then they also do it for deceptive reasons a lot of times.
Right.
And so, but there's just way too much legislation up there, and it's not being generated for our benefit. It's being generated for the benefit of different businesses. And I'm not anti-business by any means. We got to have small businesses. We got to have businesses. We got to have industry. Those things are important. It's just they seem to get more attention than our rights.
It seems that they have preferential treatment. And also, as a taxpayer, we should have the ability to voice our opinions about any piece of legislation that is eventually going to impact us in some way. So truth and transparency seems to not be in the vocabulary of our state legislature, or even on the national level. But speaking from a state perspective, we're going to have to push back, at a state level, and hold our own states accountable for participating in these types of, shenanigans.
Yeah, they seem to really kind of push those type of things, and then when the conservatives get a bill through, it's almost always a toothless bill.
Yep, absolutely.
It's almost always toothless, or something that they'll allow you to take a private right of action, which means, you can sue. It's a state law, but you can sue to enforce it on the school or whatever. Yep. And then they think they've done something.
Well, you're exactly right. And oftentimes these bills pass because it is a bill that a politician wants to pass to add to their resume. So it's something that gives them bragging rights, but it has no teeth, as you said. It's non-enforceable. And oftentimes some of these bills are actually bills that are very detrimental because they can be amended to be much worse than the alternative. And we're seeing that, happen as well. So I've always said, in terms of parental rights bills, Alliance Defending Freedom, promoted the parental rights bill in Tennessee, and we warned against that, and we said, any government big enough to enumerate parental rights is a government big enough to take those rights away. And of course, they came right back and amended that bill and gave, broad sweeping powers that are not beneficial to parents.
Now, did Alliance Defending Freedom help with the follow-on portion of that bill?
They helped with getting the bill passed to begin with, which was, we called it the fake parental rights bill in Tennessee. And we asked legislators, please do not vote for this. This is a slippery slope because, as you know, it's very easy to amend bills. And even if you have good intentions on the front end, it can end up, having very serious repercussions. And of course, they wasted no time in getting those amended. And, I discuss all of those topics in detail in the seminars, that we've been doing, because as you said, we talked about this earlier, when you said sometimes you will get ready for a show and then you realize that it's already changed. And that's exactly what happens in our wheelhouse, is that education, parental rights, it's always fluid and always changing. And so the information is never the same.
Now, this is a podcast interview, but this is different than what you do when you're doing your seminars.
Yes.
You want to talk about that, and then we'll talk about the seminar you got coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've been doing, we customize our seminars to the area where we are presenting, and we do a multitude of different seminars on different topics, just depending on the group that we're going to be presenting to and what they want to focus on. We've done seminars for groups, including Tennessee Firearms Association, where we hit heavily on, how these initiatives negatively affect our 2A rights. But what we're really doing is giving an overview in general of, again, where all this came from, where we are today, and where we're headed in the future. And then we break it down with examples of exactly how this is happening, who's been participating in this, what it looks like, the different initiatives that they are implementing to be able to, snatch our freedoms and data mine our children. And again, it's always changing. They're always doing, more and more, how they are advancing mental health initiatives in Tennessee and across the nation, and why, and what that looks like. Data surveillance and where we're moving toward that, how schools are, able to bill for many of these, mental health.
And you mentioned mental health, and you mentioned the Second Amendment. And I think that the mental health thing, that's the angle they're going to use to restrict the Second Amendment as much as possible. That's exactly what they're going to do.
Absolutely. I give real examples of that, and we go into detail about what that's looked like in other states, what we know that they're going to be doing in Tennessee, and what they've already done in Tennessee. And so I've said over and over again, they're never, ever going to have to file a red flag bill. They're not going to have to do that. Because within a few decades or less, I would say less, we will effectively be moving toward an unarmed population, because we are diagnosing our children at alarming rates with mental health illnesses.
Wow. And that's a very low down way to do it, but they will do it. And people like our governor and the idiots in our legislature will cheerlead it.
Absolutely, and I talk about how the way that TISA has allowed for the incentivization of the medicalization of our schools, not just in Tennessee but across the nation. But if you're in Tennessee, what that specifically looks like in Tennessee, we fought back against the replacing of our old BEP formula, which was the funding formula that we originally had for our schools, and we replaced that with the TISA. I said then that the TISA is the Trojan horse that they have to make sure that they implement in order to be able to advance all of this.
Why do you say that?
It has far less accountability than the old BEP funding formula.
Oh, okay.
And so we talk about that as well, and how the different weights are allowing and incentivizing schools to diagnose as many children as possible, with as many things as they can in order to, make more money.
Yeah, make more money and then classify more people as a danger to society.
Yep.
So you've got a seminar coming up December 4th. I think we got the information on that. Got a flyer.
Yes,
we'll pop
that's
that up.
correct. Yep, we'll be in Cookeville December the 4th from 6 to 8 at the Upper Cumberland Federal Union in Cookeville, Tennessee. So I hope that if you're in the area, you will come out, and I'll have an opportunity to meet you in person. That area of Tennessee has been great to us. We were just recently over in West Tennessee, and they were equally as wonderful to us there as well with Campaign for Liberty. But if you're in Cookeville on December the 4th, I highly encourage you to come out. Our goal is to educate as many people as possible prior to the legislative sessions beginning across the U.S. because if you're educated, then you are armed with the information you need to hopefully watch legislation and know when problematic legislation is being introduced, and then you can get mobilized and activated to fight back and hopefully stop Tennessee and other states across the nation from advancing this globalist agenda.
Yep. And all of them are on board. I think we saw that earlier in the week with Bill Lee with Vanderbilt and the WF forum, and we just got so many globalists in our state and in our state legislature. It's just, I really appreciate what you're doing. I didn't know you did as much as you do on as many different topics, and I appreciate that. And I definitely want to get to one of the seminars. As we've talked, I'd like to get you to a seminar here, so we're working on that. Hopefully we can do that sooner rather than later.
We'd be happy to.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
I would just say, again, do your research. And I would also say, Don't be reactive, be proactive. So go ahead now and start educating yourself on these topics so that you will be better prepared, especially as the legislative session gears up, and hold your elected officials accountable.
Yep. Be ready, because they're going to try to do something bad. Every year
Absolutely.
they do something
Yes.
bad, and now you'll have a better idea of what that is. You might not have recognized it otherwise. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. Enjoyed having you. You will be back with us January the 5th to talk about the legislation that you guys are trying to get through this session. So we're looking forward to that. Appreciate what you do, and thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you for watching this show, supporting this show. We have no second show tonight, and once again, thank you for watching. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Thanks again to Jonathan and Mary League for their financial support. You guys have been great. Now, I mentioned earlier we have our first commercial sponsor, but you guys, Jonathan and Mary, you guys have gone above and beyond since July, and we really, really appreciate that. You've pretty much kept us afloat, and thank you for that very much. Check out our audio podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We will have a special show this Sunday, November 23rd, 2 p.m., featuring local veteran David Fitzhugh. He was a 101st Airborne veteran. He served in Vietnam in 68 and 69, so it should be an interesting interview. We'll have a little more detail on that later on in this week, but that's this coming Sunday at 2 p.m. Our guest next week is Jeb Smith from Vermont, who will be here to discuss his latest book about the War for Southern Independence, titled Defending Dixie's Land, What Every American Should Know About the South and the Civil War. Now, he is from Vermont, but in my opinion, he has a good grasp of the true history of the war. He may be a Yankee, but he's a damn good Yankee. Now, I hope you can join us. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.